Hello, everybody. This is Maggie Hellstrom. Good afternoon.
Hi, Maggie.
Hello.
Good to see you. Hi, Alex. I see Leonardo, Luis, Ross, of course, Sandor.
Hello, Rainer.
Yes.
Bonjour, Françoise. We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
How do you say guten afternoon in German? Something like that.
This one doesn't exist. Guten
Oh,
Nachmittag
sorry. It's
doesn't
true.
exist. It is Guten Tag.
Yes, okay, because in French we say good something for everything. So, bon après-midi.
Yeah, but you French have more good things than the Germans do. Maybe before we start, we can just try to check the microphones. Obviously, you can hear me. Next would be Alex. Could you speak, please?
Hello. Yes, I can hear you.
Good to hear you. Ross?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. Sandor?
Yes, I hear you too.
Okay, thank you. Luis?
Yep, I'm here.
Good.
Sandor, sorry, Sandor is very far away, sorry.
I am so far away, huh? Is it better now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh la la, so I have to make some exercises then.
Okay, we heard already Françoise. Esther? We can't hear Esther currently. The problem is that the order of my list is always changing. So, Leonardo?
Hi all, here I am.
Great. Lori? Lori, we can't hear you.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, good. So this is whom did we? Andreas? Andreas Holl? Andreas, we can't hear you.
Yes, hello.
Oh, hello. Then I have Leighton Christiansen.
Hello.
Hello. Good. Mao? Mao Tsunekawa, could you please try to talk? Unmute it. We can't hear you. Mark.
Hi, Rainer.
Hi, Mark. So
Rainer,
now I lost.
Rainer, Esther says in the chat that she doesn't have a headset and can't talk, but she'll use the chat to communicate.
Fine. So, Oya?
Hello, this is Oya Bayan. Hi.
Hi, Oya. So, Ricarda?
Yes, hello, this is Ricarda Braukmann. Hi.
Hi. Willkommen. Dimitris?
Hi, Rainer.
Hi. Good to see you. Good to hear you. Rob?
Hello, welcome
Moin.
everybody.
So, whom do I have left? Romain, David.
Hello, it's Romain David here. I will use this chat for exchange.
Fine. Thomas, we already tested. Could you try it again, please?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, Thomas.
Hello together.
Yasmin?
Hello, everybody.
Hello. Then I have lots of people. Sophie? Sophie, we can't hear you. Okay, let's continue. Oh, I don't know how to pronounce it. Yelitz, Yedil? We can't hear you. Crystal? Christian? Could you please switch off your camera and try? Switch off, unmute and try.
Hörst du mich?
Ja.
Gut, ich höre dich bestens.
Fine. And Carol? Okay. We can't hear you. Ah, we can see you, but we can't hear you.
Edith, is that you're mentioning?
Who was that?
No, sorry, this is Sarah. I didn't got my video on, sorry. Switch video on.
Hi. So I would say let's start. Yes, it's the the sound of Sarah was a bit strange. It was a very deep voice. Okay, so please excuse, I think we should, because of the bandwidth, we should switch off our cameras. That would be the best. And I think we have here more than 40 people here in the telephone conference or in our virtual conference. So welcome to our BoF session in the virtual plenary P15. It is very sad that we won't be able to meet in Australia, in Melbourne. That would be much more fun. But on the other hand, I'm really overwhelmed how many people are attending in here. So I would like to ask all of us, if you're not speaking, please mute your microphone and switch off your camera. We will have only a couple of presentations. We have only a few slides for presentations, and we wanted to start more the discussions. So welcome to everybody. I hope you are all healthy and stay healthy for the future. Now I would like to start, and now I have to look into my controls because it's getting more complicated here. So now you should be able to see the slides. In the beginning, we don't want to show many slides because this session is more as a session where we want to agree on something. And this is exactly what we have in the second slide. First of all, I would like to ask you to sign in also in our collaborative notes. I will share this link also in the chat. Oh, I send it just to. So now you should see the link to our collaborative notes in the chat. And in the collaborative notes, we tried to have a list of participants. This is also something I'm trying to share now. I have a new share, and this is that one here. So Here we have the description, what I'm sharing now, the description of this BoF session. In the BoF session, you will see a couple of information. We have the collaborative notes, the link in here, where I would like to ask you to contribute. And here we also will use this collaborative notes for parts of the discussions. Then the slides we are showing here in the beginning of the sessions, we have a copy of the slides also in a Google Drive, and you can find it in here. If you go to the collaborative notes, you will see here our agenda. I will have it also in the slides. I would like to ask you also to sign in. In here, I see that many people are already doing that. And if you agree that we contact you via your email address, please fill in also the email address. Good. Now I'm getting back to the original 3 or 4 slides we would like to talk about. So now you should be able to see this. What we are doing, why we are meeting here, this BoF is called Creating an RDA Interest Group on Fair Digital Objects. So the main topic what we want to talk about is obviously fair digital objects. And what we want to do now in this session, more or less, is creating a kind of consensus. Or a consensus on whether we should create a new RDA interest group. This, we had a couple of discussions in beforehand with several people, also with the IG Data Fabric. I will talk about this a bit later. Then, if we are talking and building up an exchange and communication platform about fair digital objects, the definition of the primary objectives is somehow important. We should create a kind of a consensus, what we want to reach with that. And closely connected is how we operate in the near future. And of course, we are looking for members who plan to contribute actively. So what we have in here, we have a meeting agenda. So we are now currently at this part agreeing on the meeting agenda. I would like to ask you if somebody wants to talk, you will see your participants list. In the participants list, if you switch it on with your controls you have on the bottom of your screen, here you can switch on the participants list. Here you will find also some controls for yes, no, and so on. And you can also ask if you want to talk. Alex, could you please try it out? Ha! Alex, you have the word. You can talk. Thank you very much.
Yes, I talked. There.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for trying. So we try to keep track with the participants list, but with 39 participants, I don't see them. I don't see all of them. I have to scroll a bit. But we will try to manage somehow. Alex, you can put your hand down, please. Thank you. So then we want to give a very, very brief introduction of fair digital objects. What is the topic about? Then we would like to discuss about the RDA IG or the IG Data Fabric, how to work on in the future, discuss and create consensus on the primary objectives and the modes of operation. We have a bit more than or approximately 1.5 hours for that. I think this could bring us to some results. Maggie.
Yes. I think you are recording this session, right?
Oh, yes.
So you need to inform people about that, because otherwise you.
Oh, thank you very much. This is something I didn't switch on. Yes. this meeting is being recorded. The question is, should I try to stop the recording?
I don't think you need to stop the recording unless anyone has issues with it. I think it's can't join.
Yeah. Rob? You don't like the recording. I try to stop.
No. You asked whether you should stop the recording, and the answer is no.
Oh, Rob, you're too precise. Thank you very much. So we will continue with the recording. And meanwhile, I found also the buttons how to stop the recording. But if everybody agrees or nobody disagrees that we record, so let's stay the recording. The question is now, do you agree with the agenda? Well, thank you very much. Most of you, I see a part of a majority agreeing with the agenda. So we would like to continue. What we are talking about are fair digital objects. Oh, you don't see the slides now, or do you? Let's try it again. These slides are...
We see your desktop, but not very large, but it's better now.
So, do you see the slides now?
Yes, they could be slightly larger, but it's okay, I think.
It could be larger. Is it better?
Yes, but you are not in presentation mode. You are in...
No, I'm not in presentation mode. So what we are talking about, more or less, what is the main topic of this BoF session are fair digital objects. You might have seen a couple of presentations until now about the fair digital objects. They have been introduced by various RDA groups, by the Data Foundation and Terminology Group, by the PID Information Type Group, by the PID Kernel Information Group, and the Kernel Profile Group. And they are also topic in one of the European recommendations, how to build up infrastructures for fair data. So what are we talking about? You see here a rather complex picture. It's a depict of an hourglass, more or less. We have seen this in various forms, as a tree, as an hourglass, which I think the idea came from Bob Kahn, Peter Wittenberg, and many others to depict it like this. I'm using that currently just to show that on the bottom part, here we have the real research data. Here we have metadata, we have data types, we have schemas in various and not always machine readable presentations. And the question is, if we want to find on top, if we want to discover data, and we have a list of objects, how can we go through to the various types of data, to the various schemas of metadata, to find the data we are desiring, or just to discover which data exists to a certain topic? And currently we have lots of repositories. Many of these repositories are presenting landing pages, or they are presenting representations which are human readable, but not that much machine readable. And the basic idea of the fair digital objects is that we have a very, very small common of each of the data objects we are talking about. And this is what the groups introduced more or less. We have a PID, a persistent identifier, and we have attached in the metadata of this persistent identifier some additional information. So, for example, we have information about the data type in there, which is just a link to a registry where all the types are registered. It can be a JPEG file, for example. It can be just as simple as a record of a data of a database, and so on. Then we have a location URL where we find the data, which points to the data. Then we have additional other information about the schemas of the metadata, of the access policies, and so on. And this little thing here, which we have in the PID information record, this makes more or less a very small and elegant virtual data object. For me, in my opinion, I think, well, calling it fair digital objects, we can quarrel about that. It sounds complicated. A digital object is something very, very abstract, and even computer science people might even think about it's something more complicated. For me, it is kind of a representation of this in PID information record. And for me, it sounds like it's a virtual data object. It's just an address with little metadata, which helps me and my machines to access the information which are stored in metadata repositories, in other repositories, in registries. So it's a kind of a minimum representation of the data, and it makes it machine readable. So in general, what if I have such an information record? It's independent of the data and the metadata standards, if I'm using standards, which are below. And it is machine actionable. But there's also a but. If we want to have a representation of a fair digital object, the nice thing, if I have a list of PIDs, for example, I collected 1 million PIDs, and I wanted to find out whether in the PIDs I find data of a temperature sensor. Of course, I have to need to access the metadata automatically, which is stored in here, and it can be stored in various formats. So the metadata standards or the metadata schemas I want to read out and interpret in here must be also machine readable, and they must be stored somewhere. And they must be stored in information systems, which can be a registry, for example. So what we need is here to make this fair digital objects or these virtual objects machine actionable, we need an ecosystem of information systems. So for example, one of the most trivial ones, it's not trivial, I'm sorry, I don't want to say that. One of the things which has been already realized in RDA was the data type registry, which was a part of the data type working group, the data type registry working group. So here we have the system, but we need more information systems. And what we need for that is, of course, we need a kind of an agreement for some simple principles. How do we build these PID information records? Okay, we had several working groups in that, and currently there's an active working group in RDA, which is the PID kernel information profile group, which is led by the way, also by Tobias, and I've seen him in the list of participants of this group here. And we have others. So, and now the question is, how do we bring all these kind of information systems, how do we bring them together, and how do we coordinate the work which we need to make these fair digital data objects somehow real? If we have this ecosystem, then we can build easy to use tools to access all the information stored here on the bottom automatically, and we can discover information we can store, and we are independent of the individual ways how people store their data and the metadata. That just must be accessible and open, and the information how the data and the metadata and other things and other information is stored must be also accessible. So this is more or less the principal idea behind that. And now I'm going back to our objectives. First of all, do we have questions about the principal idea? I don't see any comments currently. Luis.
Yeah, a question here. If you could come back to that slide with the hourglass. Because what seems to me is that this picture is depicting the original idea of digital object coming from Bob Kahn in '95, that will have the reference to the bit sequence, a kind of type in a typing system, and some other technical information. But the idea, the evolution of that from the digital object into a fair digital object will be the explicit separation between data and metadata, or any kind of digital object and its metadata, where in this PID information record or kernel record, whatever we want to call it, we have the identifier, this identification record, having the reference to the object itself, the bit sequence in that case of digital objects, and to the metadata, because then if you have the identifier of anything that you don't know what's that, by resolving this identifier into this PID information record, you know the type of the thing that you are dealing with. If you don't want to interact directly with your object, because it may be a petabyte of data or something else, you could, from that point, resolve, have the information how to get more information, meaning how to retrieve the metadata about that object. Is that still the case?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, good, thanks.
I think this is more or less how we want to see it. Maybe others want to comment on that. Tobias, I've seen you in the list. Do you agree? Oh, Alex.
I would comment and say that as a general principle, yes, but it's optional. You don't have to do it.
Yes,
meaning that you don't. It is basically a domain or application choice as to whether you separate out the metadata into a separate object or keep it in the principal object.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus.
Carol, you raised your hand.
Yes, I was about to say the same thing with Alex, that for 2 years, the Fair Data Maturity Model Working Group of RDA has been in session, and it's hit exactly this problem. That actually the idea in principle of separating out metadata and data is theoretically very attractive, but in practice is really hard and becomes incredibly domain dependent. So it cannot be a very strict kind of mandatory requirement. And we could well learn from the experiences they've done in that working group, on this very topic of the separation of data and metadata. So I entirely agree with Alex.
Yeah. maybe I misunderstood a bit the question of Louis. What this object allows you, it allows you a freedom, really the freedom, whether you want just to store the data and the metadata separately, whether you put it into one object. So for example, there exists some file formats like the physicants, the high energy physics, like the root format, or whether it's an HDF5 format or others.
No, that's fine. It's just because then there is absolutely no difference from the original idea of digital objects from Bob Kahn, that didn't have even the concept of metadata. And in that sense, metadata is just yet another type of digital object. But then that's different from what has been proposed as the fair digital object. That was just my point. If it's feasible or not, that's another story, but it's just that it seems that it's just adding without any other consequence the term fair in the original digital object picture, let's say.
I think the idea, sorry, this is Mark. I think the idea is, I mean, I think you're right but the point of putting fair on it, I think, is, in some ways, it's just window dressing, and it's more the point is that we're trying to further specify what makes a digital object really useful. You know, so I think it's building from what Bob originally laid out and specifying that more rigorously, and recognizing, as Carol and Alex were saying, that it's going to vary in different applications and disciplines.
Thanks, Mark, for that. Dimitris has also put a link about the fair digital objects into the chat, where we can find additional information about that. So now going back to our agenda, this was just an introduction, what it is about, and we originally in this session we don't want to go too deep into the discussion of the really interesting part of the fair digital objects, how we can make it work and how we can make it useful. But it's more how we organize and coordinate our work for the near or mid future. So now I'm going back into the agenda, and we were discussing whether for the fair digital objects and the information exchange, we should found a new RDA interest group. On the other hand, during this discussion, it popped out that the IG data fabric has also the topic fair digital objects in its agenda. And the question raised whether we should create a new RDA IG, or we should continue with this topic in the under the umbrella of the IG data fabric. For that, we talked to a couple of persons. One was Tobias with Rob and so on, with Rob Quick in this case, and Rob isn't part of this discussion. What do you think? Should we continue in the IG data fabric? Dimitris.
Thanks, Rainer. I actually think this is, I think the question should also include, first of all, I would ask, before we are able to answer the question whether we need something separate or whether we need to include this activity within the existing agenda of another group, to understand more what is the current landscape of activities that touch upon this topic, because this will probably give us more information and informed decision on how a new group or a new activity within an existing group within RDA can be fully complementary with the overall community momentum. So I don't know if there's a slide on this or you will be presenting that, but there are several let's say, groups at this point. Mainly they overlap in terms of membership, but there are several, let's say, focal points that really look from different points of view this space of fair digital objects. I mean, there is a coordination group on fair digital objects. There is a technical implementation group. Many of the people in this call are actually participating. Rob, as you said, is leading this. There is a GoFair group relevant to this. There is also the relevant RDA groups that have provided substantial information and content up to now to really bring up to speed the concept of fair digital objects. There is the research objects, Carol is co-leading in that. So I think it's important to understand what we really want, what is missing in all of that. Do we see this group as a coordination potentially group? Do we see it more oriented towards a specific aspect of the content, implementation, use cases? So I think if we start the discussion from this point of view, what potentially we're missing, then it would be easier to respond to the question whether we need a new group or whether we need to incorporate those activities within an existing group in RDA.
Thank you for that. Maggie, you're next.
Yes, I just wanted to make the sort of comment from a researcher or normal RDA user or member point of view, and that is that the term data fabric is extremely confusing to a lot of people, so they don't understand what that is supposed to mean unless they read up on it. So I would prefer to profile this fair digital object discussion if we could do that in a clearly separated way. But that's just my point.
I'm really sorry, the last part of your sentence was hard to understand for me. Could you please repeat?
Yes, I was just saying that I would prefer if this group would be a separate entity from the data fabric, since I think that highlights it better and separates it from the data fabric discussion, which is much broader in my view.
Okay. What I have attached to this couple of slides, originally I didn't want to discuss it, were 3 slides Tobias, Rob and Juan created for the Helsinki meeting about the data fabric. Tobias, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, I can comment. So about all of the points about what group should this topic go under? Is it data fabric? Is it something else? Is it entirely different? Is it sort of a subtopic or a super topic? I personally feel that it would be very healthy for the topic to sort of stand on its own. So have its, and really Maggie's point here as well. So really have its own recognition aside from the data fabric concept. And Rainer, you know that well, we've had these discussions well already weeks ago about whether this should be some sort of merger or some sort of transition, some sort of renaming of a group, some sort of does it go in parallel? I don't want to take a very strong stance here. I think it is up to the whole crowd here to figure out a good way. I don't really think that the chairs of the data fabric group should be so much giving the stance here, but well, I'm just one chair, so maybe the others would disagree. It's just,
Thank you.
That's just my personal point.
Yeah, so I don't know the right order. I have Maggie, but maybe you didn't put your hand down. So it would be Mark.
Thanks, Rainer. So I'm just reading this slide here and mindful of what everybody is saying, that data fabric is a confusing term. Nobody really understands, at least outsiders don't really understand what it means. But reading this slide here, it sounds very much like what we're talking about, and fair digital objects is a much, you know, trendier name and people understand it. And it's in some ways more explicit. It seems to me that maybe the data fabric is the group, but we rename it. Just a thought.
So I'm back. Sorry, my phone called. Yeah. So the question is, what should we do?
Maybe rename it and refocus it. So maybe that's the. So it seems to me that there's a huge amount of overlap, but there's definitely a key interest in furthering the specifications around fair digital objects, and so that's what we want to do and coordinate that. And it seems to me that maybe that's a merger or a refocusing or something. But it sounds like we definitely want to at least use the term because it resonates more than data fabric.
Okay, this was something I heard also from Rob Quick. Now I'm sorry, I lost track about the order. Maggie or Tobias? Who was first?
Go ahead, Maggie.
Maggie. Oh,
yeah, I
Maggie
just wanted to ask if it's possible to rename an interest group. Wouldn't it be better to let it sort of self-die by the wayside and start off with a new group?
This is something TAP can discuss, but in principle, we had in the past a group which renamed itself, which was, I think the renaming was done for the, how is it called? I don't know anymore. So, but I think it's possible. Tobias.
Because I just wanted to add to that I think there are so many references around in literature now and in other reports that are to a data fabric RDA group. So that if we break that, then it might be very difficult for other people to find their way back when they are looking at older stuff. So that's the point.
I see. Tobias, you're next.
So also, again, looking at the slide that is here on the shared screen, one thing that strikes me quite particularly is just the first sentence. The group has existed formally since P4, and actually it was already discussed right at P1. Now that is more than 5 years ago. That's a very long time for a concept to be around and for a concept also to evolve. And my perspective here is back then, and some of you have been there, right? So the discussions back then were coordinated by Peter, and I guess he was also the one who just invented this term data fabric to have something stand there. It's not necessarily something that had any, any long history back then. It's just a term. Now I see that this sort of over the history, it evolves now into something that is much better understood. And this is what this point of what is a data fabric? Well, people get confused, and it has always been that way because maybe the term is just so fluffy. So in this case, fair digital objects is a much better term. So I would, from the state of discussion here, I feel that it would actually be very good for the whole topic, for all of the possible future participants as well, to just rename the group and just set aside the term data fabric. I mean, the points that were also just mentioned, that there are a lot of references to the data fabric group in the literature, in documents, and so on. Well, I would just say c'est la vie. I mean, this is how research also evolves. It's not anything that is fixed and set in stone. Things can change. If you think about other terms like cloud, this has been called grid years before, and possibly something entirely different before that. I think it's just a natural evolution. So I would not like to encourage anyone to stick with the term just for the term's sake. Again, also because this was invented at a time where nobody really had a good idea what this would lead into. And I think this is now a much better time, and it's actually a good opportunity to just reap here.
I would say let's keep that in mind. But before renaming groups, there is a data fabric group, of course. Tobias is one of the co-chairs of the data fabric. But I think we should also ask all the members of the data fabric and to give them the opportunity to comment on that. Well, I see a lot of discussion currently in the chat. I'm sorry, I'm not able to follow all of this currently, but we will have it a bit for later. What I would like to do, if we want to introduce to the Data Fabric members that we want to put this topic under the umbrella of the Data Fabric, we should at least agree on a couple of objectives, what we want to reach with the Fair Digital Object Group, what are the main objectives of the Data Fabric Group. And for that, we planned that we could collect a couple of ideas, and we would like to ask you, and it could be a bit messy since we are 44 participants currently. Please go under our collaborative notes, and we will take 5 to, or let's have 10 minutes for that. And there you will find a list of participants where you have signed in, but at a later point, we will have the discussions, the primary objectives. And Rosella and Thomas worked already in the background. If you could, please share your ideas. What could be of this new group or of the renamed group of the Data Fabric? What could the primary objectives in this field? So just please, for the next, let's say until let's say for the next 8 minutes, we're in different time zones. I wanted to tell you there's a time in here. For the next 8 minutes, please fill in your ideas. You can extend the lines if you like, under the point discussion primary objectives. I see that most of you have logged into the collaborative notes, and please share your ideas. I already gave some in the beginning. Please add.
Just to let you know, probably you don't need to add your name. You have to scroll the table because all the names are already there.
Thanks, Ross.
In particular, I see Alex that just put his name, and I'm pretty sure I put it. Yes, it's in the second page.
And another comment, if you don't want to have your objective associated with your name, there are also anonymous entries at the end of the table.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas.
Yeah, you see that Rosella and Thomas are working in the background to collect everything. It's great to see you working.
Rainer, what is the last column in the table for? The one with X's in it?
This is just for administration.
Yeah,
this is
this
something we...
sorry.
No,
Yeah, this is
continue, Russ, please.
it's for us in the background to check because we are preparing a plot in real time. So this is for us, since we are two, to check whether this is done or not. Don't worry about that.
Okay, thank you.
Just I must say, it is impressive to see 40 people working simultaneously in one object, in one document. So, welcome back. I see that people are still writing. Since Rosella and Thomas are trying to collect the results. Since, I'm sorry for that, since Thomas and Rosella are collecting the results currently, Do you have any comments? Mark, I have seen that you really try to pin down some of the objectives.
Okay, are you wanting me to comment?
Yeah, please. I'm sorry.
Okay, I just put down 4 things. I specify, identify, clarify, and coordinate. And by specify, and Rob says maybe this already exists, I wasn't sure about that, is develop, more precise specifications for how an FDO actually works, So is it really just what Bob Kahn laid out? If so, why aren't we all implementing it? Is it just the DOIP, or is there more sophistication to it? And then maybe sort of related to that is identify, maybe register the resources that are necessary to make fair digital objects work, like the actual PID registries, are there particular PIDs that we, that I don't want to go down there, but, and then data type registries, and there's various ways of implementing that. I noticed in some of the other examples, people were thinking of, capturing implementation cases. And so maybe that's a similar sort of idea, describe how people are actually doing this. And then clarify, what are the best practices? As we learn from these implementations and what these resources are, help provide guidelines to repositories, for example, that should be able to implement these. And then coordinate, foster awareness across, as we discussed earlier, there's a bunch of groups that are working in this space, and I'm just trying to foster better coordination and communication across those groups. And I think that, maybe sort of ties into those best practices as well. So those were my ideas.
Thank you very much. What do you think about, okay, we have specify, identify, clarify, coordinate. What about show? So showing good examples, what we can do for with fair digital objects to provide showcases, not exactly use cases, but showcases.
Yeah, I like that. I think there were other in the table, there are other people that suggested that as well.
Do we have other comments? Because I think Thomas and Rosella need some time in the background.
More than a comment, this is Leonardo. I have a question for all. I mean, since we are discussing about a digital object or a specific technology, I do assume that one of the key components we should discuss about are a repository or catalog where these digital objects are going to be stored. And of course, I am referring to the fair digital object, not the real payload. So probably this should be one of the primary services we should speak about, a repository of fair digital object, isn't it?
I tried to formulate an answer. What I understood from the fair digital object that you don't have one repository with one accessing technology. You have many of them, and we have many of legacy information sources. For example, we have already lots of repositories. We have lots of databases which are open to the public. The only problem is that they are not really machine readable because they use, or machine actionable, since they use different technologies, and these technologies and schemas and information types are not transparent. the fair digital object provides a trick and a small piece of information where I can put together all the machine readable information from the various components. So I can collect, if I have a digital object, which is, let's say, a TIFF image of a medieval manuscript. So we know that this medieval manuscript has a data type and it can be a TIFF image, for example. And this information, a pointer to this information, we find in the digital object. We don't assume anything how this TIFF image is provided with which technology. Then there exists some metadata to it. And the metadata might be in the TEI, Text Encoding Initiative format. And then there's a link to the metadata and the metadata schemas and standards which are used. In this case, it would be TEI. And of course, this information about this metadata standard or schema must be also machine accessible. So we have a registry where we find, okay, here we have TEI, and it has these properties, and these properties are, of course, machine readable. So we can also make use of all the legacy information or research data collections we have already. So it's not, of course, we can build also one repository for fair digital objects, but it won't be only one central repository, but there will be many of them, because in the various scientific fields, of course, they have different ways to use their own standards. Thomas.
No, we are done.
You're done. Okay, thank you very much. But first, I would like to give the word to Carol.
Yes, so I was going to back you up on this by declaring that there'll be one central fair digital object repository. We might as well all pack up and go home, because we will not be given any credibility in the community. Because this is not actually the principle behind this at all. This is a framework. This is a framework for us to implement so that we will have multiple repositories in our own communities. So this is really, it came across as one single repository. So we really can't do this. We need to make ourselves very credible. What we're trying to do here is quite, as Louis pointed out, quite revolutionary, because if it wasn't, it would already be done by now. So I think it's very important for us to get that across to the community, that there will be, this is a framework for how to organize not just data, but all forms of digital objects, and that there will be multiple implementations, and there will be multiple repositories, and there'll be multiple platforms.
Thanks a lot. So now I would like to give back to Thomas, because he collected your ideas about the objectives. Thomas, do you want to show a slide for that?
An image, yeah. Just a second. Okay, you have to unshare first, please.
I unshared.
Thank you. And here we are. So is it big enough for all of you? I hope so.
Okay. That's better. That's better. Thank you. So what do we see here?
So the following. What we did is we went through the table just in time live, and we tried to identify common topics, common terms which were mentioned in the different points by all of you, and we put them to another table together with the occurrence. So what you see here now is one of the famous word clouds, where the bigger the term, the more the term was mentioned by you. I have to admit that we probably did not get all the terms, so some might be missing, but I think this wouldn't influence the overall picture so much. So you see that the most topics or the most points were related to developer support in the broadest sense, but also coordination of the whole fair digital object topic. Another quite big point is the collection of implementation cases or of usage scenarios of some kind of showcases and things like that. And one of the points I just saw, which was added by Rosella after I compiled the graphic, is that making fair digital objects concrete has actually much more impact. So this point was mentioned in different forms 8 times by all of you, whereas the developer support, which is currently the biggest one, was mentioned 4 times. So you can just imagine that according to the table, the concreteness of fair digital object seems to be the most burning topic at the moment. Other points which were also mentioned are things like interdisciplinarity, interoperability, actionability was mentioned 2 times. But the biggest terms you see are obviously the most relevant, asked for this group.
Well, thank you very much, Rosella and Thomas for the presentation. Do we have comments to that? Additional information, explanations? Carol, you just have your hand raised, but I think it's from the last time, isn't it? Yeah. Thomas, could you please let's see the picture open? Could you please share it again?
It's also in the meeting notes if you want to see it afterwards. So give me a second to find it again. Here it is. Bigger. Go.
Thank you very much. So, for me, the question arises, what do we do with that? We see here a couple of information. We see here a very brief overview. Of course, your answers won't be lost. They are still stored in the table, in the original one. And I think this is just here a picture for starting the discussion. Do you agree on that, or do you think that we need, or did we miss a certain focus? I see, so just to report this, I see here a big demand for coordination, for coordination, this regard, for support developers by coordinating and exchanging information to collect implementation cases. This also helps to making the fair digital objects more concrete and understandable. Do you have any comments on that?
Rainer, this is Mark. Just trying to follow all the discussion in the chat and on the document and the slides. And this make FDOs concrete, I think, is kind of central. I think that's what a lot of us are talking about, is what does that really mean? You know, and it doesn't mean a central registry to rule them all, as Carol said. But is there a protocol, a common protocol? Is this, you know, this is this extra layer of abstraction that we want to be able to apply. And I think we all sort of get that in principle, but we don't know what it really means in practice. And that seems to me is the real challenge.
Thanks. Dimitris.
Yeah, I'm also following the notes in the Google Doc, and I'm thinking how we can really more effectively use the superpowers of RDA, which for me is the coexistence of so many different disciplines and so many different people from different perspectives into this. And I think the best way to use RDA is not really looking only into the mechanics of this, but really demonstrating how the efforts of the community around FDO and the FDO framework can really be concretely implemented across real world cases, using the community of RDA as the driving force for that. And hopefully by the end of this process, we can transform or help with the powers of RDA, transform those community recommendations into RDA tangible recommendations that have been really proven to be effective across real world scenarios across the RDA communities or across some of the RDA communities.
Thanks, Dimitris. Other comments? I see a lot of comments in the chat, but I must admit that I'm not able to follow all of them. Yes, we will check them offline. Thanks, François. Coming back to the discussions, I think we collected now a couple of objectives, what we should do, and now we are coming back to the question, how can we do that? We had this discussion whether to put it under the umbrella of the data fabric and maybe renaming the data fabric. We have the opportunity to found an own group using the objectives we have collected now. It would be, since it is so broad, more an interest group from which other working groups can be spawned. So what do you think now after this discussion? Or should I just ask first? If we try a vote, put it under the umbrella of the data fabric, that's a yes, or founding an own group, that's a no. Can I just see your opinions?
Can you repeat the question, please, Rainer, before we vote?
Okay, put it under the umbrella of data fabric. That's a yes. I will put it into the chat. Umbrella.
Natalie is trying to speak. Natalie is willing to speak here.
Hi. Just a question before we make that vote. Are there other things that the data fabric group is planning on working on, or was this intended to be the next singular focus? I think that's important to know. In other words, does the choice to create a new group mean that the data fabric group is then going to fold up, or would it continue on doing something else?
Oh, I think here we have to ask the data fabric itself. Tobias, do you have any idea?
So from my perspective, I think this has been we've discussed that before, a topic that sort of evolves out of the data fabric discussions, out of all of that. For my part, I would be very happy to see this as the focus of the data fabric group. But as I also put in the chat box, what is not clear to me to this vote is then if you say you put it under the umbrella of the data fabric group, does this mandatorily mean that the data fabric group gets renamed? Okay, so I'm reading Rob's comment here. So apparently there is more than just two options. I believe these should be clarified.
I think we're overthinking this. I mean, I think Natalie hit the nail on the head that if the data fabric group isn't going to do anything else, then this is the data fabric group. And then the name is a separate issue.
I disagree with that. You cannot put it under the data fabric group and ignore all of the discussion that has been going on before. So there was a very strong urge not to use the name data fabric for this because it is confusing and many other reasons.
I agree. So I guess what I would propose is that this is the data fabric group renamed.
For that, we have to ask the data fabric group. Dimitris.
Yeah, but for me the question is the charter, the original, the scope as it is written in the group, covering what we want to do for the FDOs? That's the question, basically. And if we think that is inclusive enough to allow the group, the data fabric, the renamed data fabric group, to focus on this, then I don't see a problem with that. I think it's actually an effective way of doing it. But if the charter, if the case statement of the group is confusing, not to be able for people to understand, or if we need to change dramatically that charter, then I would say it would make more sense to set up a new group so that we at least keep the contain the previous group and close it as an entity and then move on to the new one. So for me, it's all about the actual content of the previous group.
As far as I understood the data fabric and how the data fabric is presenting itself, it would fit under the umbrella of the data fabric. Karen had a different proposal. What about creating an FDO sub-task or a task group within the data fabric? This is also a possibility. Sorry, I think Tobias first, second Alex, but I'm not sure.
So please don't be overly bureaucratic here. Inventing something like subgroups and trying to move around the issue that you don't know what the data fabric group would like to see here, or we have to ask them. Really, whom are you asking here? If you say we have to ask the group, there is enough people in this call that are also members of the data fabric group that at least I, as a data fabric group chair, would think it is quite reasonable to stick to the recommendations that this group here makes, this ad hoc group. And now, of course, there are two other chairs involved in the data fabric group, but I don't think that it would be well aligned with the RDA principles, meaning that RDA is a bottom-up process, to just let the group chairs decide that. You're the people who have an interest in this, so you should decide. And if you decide this is something that is worth to be put under the umbrella of the data fabric group, then just let's do that. Don't make it overly complicated. Don't invent new groups if you don't have to. Just reuse it and rename it.
Thanks, Tobias. Alex?
Okay, yes, I agree exactly with what Tobias has just said. Let's not make it too bureaucratic. But Sarah Jones, I think, has just made the point in the chat that I wanted also to make, which is that, we see from this word cloud that, we're moving this from being an area of interest and discussion into an area where we actually want to achieve something concrete. And therefore, perhaps it makes sense to make it as a working group under the umbrella of the data fabric group, with specific outputs.
Thank you. Françoise?
Yes, it's just to remind that the working group is 18 months. So if it's possible to have a work plan which has incremental results, it's perfect. And I think it's good to have real results, as we have heard about practicalities, practical things getting out. But this would require some work to set up the work plan of the working group. and it will be very, very, very focused probably because it has to get the results very quickly. So I would say that there is it's good to have a host somewhere. Yes, it's what Sarah is saying more or less also.
Yeah. If I put myself into the situation that I should write a working group proposal or a chart, a case statement for this topic, I had the feeling that it is a bit too broad and we need smaller topics which can be spawned from this group because we have here sub objectives which can be reached in 18 months. But for the whole what we collected, I think it's too big for currently for a working group. So I'm sorry, I don't know whether Luis or Maggie is first.
Luis, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. I was just saying that about exactly about this to make the goals and the objectives very concrete, because if it's this model of digital object has been presented, what else do we still need besides what the original design from Bob Kahn and the implementation more recently from Bob Quick in Indiana that implemented the infrastructure that responds to implements the OIP. So we resolve to this PID information record and with all these proper references. So is it the domain specific things of defining some domain specific concerns on top of that?
Answers to that? Maggie?
No, I will take down my hand, sorry.
But Alex,
yeah.
To respond to that, I think it's the formal, at least in one step, it's the formalization of the FDO framework, which exists, just as a document written by, a relatively small number of people. So that could be given as a specific working group objective to turn that into a recommendation.
But then I'm lost in the terminology, because if you're talking about the Fair Digital Object Framework, it's a different thing that has been presented here. I know because I wrote that document, and I wrote the original idea of the framework, which is different from this. This is implemented. This is specified and is implemented already. The other one is just a set of ideas that you're right, it needs to be implemented, it needs to be properly specified and so on. But these are two, as far as I can see, these are two different things.
So whenever we are talking about this group or what we want to reach, I see the Fair Digital Object Framework as one implementation. As we said beforehand, there can be multiple implementations with various technologies. What we need is a kind of communication. We need to agree somehow on common specifications, which then can be implemented in various technologies and in various frameworks. But I don't see that one framework realizing the idea of Fair Digital Objects will suit us all.
I think the Fair Digital Object Framework, as it's currently cast in its 1.02 version, is a set of generic guidelines which can be implemented in more than one way. So in that sense, it meets the requirement that you just stated.
Okay.
Exactly. It is a framework. It's not the concrete. So
No,
it's
a
a set of, yeah, exactly, that can be
It's a
implemented
set of
using
recommendations.
different platforms. Exactly.
Yeah.
But
so,
you know, the framework, the fair digital object framework is different from the concept of fair digital object that has been presented here, because it extends the original idea of Bob Kahn.
Okay, Mark, you're next.
So I guess I just have a naive question. So if I was a repository manager, I wouldn't have the first idea now as to how to sort of engage with this. What am I supposed to do? If I read that document, would I know what to do? I haven't read the document, so I don't know, but I suspect not. I think that there's a last mile problem in terms of implementation, that I'm managing a repository. I want to make my data more fair. I understand this concept of fair digital objects. What do I do? I don't know that there's, you know, if I'm not steeped in this, a clear path for me is to know what to do.
Maggie?
Yeah, that was why I was stressing concrete implementation when I was adding my points to the common document. I think it's not only best practices in terms of sort of bullet points, do this, do that, but really having code, having really concrete things that I can either employ myself as a repository manager if I'm computer savvy enough, or that it's absolutely clear how I can add this translation layer to maybe fit my existing RESTful API or whatever, so that it works with DOIP or similar things. I think that's really where the shoe is too tight now, to use the Swedish idiom. And there are all these existing both RIs, research infrastructures, and repositories and other sort of data curation points, which have invested years and millions of euros or dollars or whatever in what they have today. And we have to convince them why they should be adapting to this new world of FDOs, and also how they can achieve that concretely. I think that's could be a good thing for a working group or something like that, to really look at specifying things in such a way that it becomes easier to understand how to then go on and do the technical implementation, while at the same time helping to showcase concrete implementations, which should then of course be completely openly shared, how this has been done.
Mm-hmm. Mark, do you still have your hand up?
Oh, no, sorry. But it sounds like just looking at the chat, it sounds like we're getting some consensus. There's a lot of desire to, you know, specify this more concretely as to what is necessary to implement a fair digital object, starting with the framework document, starting with the DOIP, maybe also looking, as Leo suggested, with OAI, ORE. But really, you know, especially given that a lot of repository managers aren't super tech savvy, you know, they're archivists, and they need, you know, some hand-holding on how to do this.
So giving them additional information for that. Yeah. Luis.
Yeah, I completely agree. But then we have to have clarity about what the new group or the renamed group or whatever it's going to be based on. If it's going to be based on if it's going to be based on the fair digital object framework, we should present that and say, do you want to move from this general idea, and even that document that has some generic requirements and guidelines, to be a little bit more concrete as the basis to guide different implementations. So it's still in that stage. The digital object world is in a further stage already, because we have formal protocols defined, implementations running. So I think that these are different things. Again, we have to decide which one we are going to work based on which one we are going to work.
Okay. So we have seen now lots of opinions in this direction, and I think it converges really. What we need to do now is to collect. We have to provide a summary of that, what we have discussed today. And what we also need maybe are a couple of persons who are able or who want to contribute to that and who want to help to summarize the idea and to come to a conclusion. What we need to do now, since we have seen lots of information, I'm really, really overwhelmed by this discussion. Thank you very much for that. But what we need to do now is to summarize, to come to a certain conclusion, and then to propose this one to our group. And I would like to ask who would like to contribute who would like to contribute actively to summarize and to plan the next steps in here. So definitely, Rosella,
Well,
Thomas,
I can help, René, but I think I'd like to hear from those that have, like Luis, that has been working on the previous work. I feel pretty naive in this area.
I beg your pardon, I didn't understand it correctly.
I said I'm happy to help, but I think I would need, that we need to involve those that have been involved in the earlier work, like Luis, who I guess is the author of this framework document. So I'm pretty naive about all this, so I would need more.
Maggie?
Yeah, I'm also happy to help with drafting things and formulating things, but not at a much more organizational level, so to speak. So I hope you and your colleagues are able to pick up on that.
Then, Françoise, thank you very much. Alex?
Yeah, I'm happy to contribute.
Thanks a lot. Well, so more or less we are coming to an end. Thank you very much for this really great discussion and your contributions. Are there other comments, other topics, or other points of interest in here? Dimitris.
Just to say congratulations, Rainer. You had 40 people working in the document, and this worked very well. So it's a huge experiment what we're doing with the virtual plenary. So this is a very good example how this can work. So well done to everyone, also to the people who help with reviewing all of these chaotic contributions and making sense of this in the document.
Well, you did it. Thanks, Dimitris, for your words. But I must admit, most of the work in the background went to Rosella and to Thomas, who kept track to all of this information, and who will help also for the future to summarize what we did here. Also, thanks a lot to the Secretariat who supported and gave us the opportunity. And it's the first time really that I had here a virtual conference with 40 plus people, which really worked. That's just great. Thank you very much for your contributions, especially for Mark, Luis, Maggie, Françoise for the further help. We will keep you informed about the next steps, and you will get at latest the next email about that latest in 2 weeks. On the other hand, I would like to say, well, thank you very much and keep healthy. Bye-bye.
And thanks so much, Rainer. It was absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much, all. Bye-bye. Stay safe.
Thank you for the great fun. Great fun. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you, bye.
Bye-bye.